everyone's an individual and you want to be spoken to as an individual. We want to deliver, so we want to have a focus on early careers or internal mobility. We want to deliver a good experience. We go out and proactively identify talent that we feel is going to meet those business needs. What are the mechanics and how does it take that it takes to deliver a talent acquisition function to the business? I think communication and engagement is such a critical part of talent acquisition. People value honesty and understanding where they are in the process, really looking to understand sort of, problem solving skills, collaboration skills, communication skills, analytical skills. How do you take your sort of, your big cohort and how do you put them through a fair and equitable process without the use of a resume at all? So it's how do we make sure that the machine runs effectively and that we create space for our consultants to be consulting. Oh gosh, that's a good question.
Hi, and welcome to this edition of Higher Thinking. I'm Pat Morrissey, and I'm here in London on my way to go see Natasha San Juan, who leads talent acquisition for the UK, EMEA, Middle East, and Africa for Marsh McLennan. We're going to get into a conversation and really talk to Natasha about, hey, what good looks like in talent acquisition. How do you think about regional and cultural nuances to create a great experience for candidates? And how do you move beyond the CV to really focus on potential? Looking forward to a great conversation. Natasha, welcome to Higher Thinking.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for making time for us. We want to get into a conversation today broadly about what does great look like in hiring, where you and the team are going, share some best practices, etc. But before we get to the really hard-hitting questions, we have to start with a few icebreaker questions just to help you loosen up a little bit.
Okay.
So first question is, are you a night owl or are you an early morning person?
I'm a night owl that's forced to get up very early. But generally a night owl, yeah.
Yeah, so if you have to get up very early, are you tea, coffee, or something else to help kickstart your day?
Coffee, a lot of coffee.
How do you take your coffee?
With a bit of milk.
Well played.
Yeah.
I think my preferred state, and it's confusing when I come to the UK and they say, how would you like your coffee? And I say, fully loaded, please. And they sort of look at me and say, so you want milk and sugar? Yes, I do. So late night, so if you're late night and you're trying to relax after a hard day of conquering the talent acquisition landscape, are you more likely to read a book or binge watch a show?
Binge watch a show, definitely. I should read a book, but I binge watch a show.
Anything particular you're watching now or you'd recommend?
We were talking about it last night, actually. We were talking about One Day, which has just recently come out on Netflix. So I've just finished that successfully.
Nice. When you think about an event with food, are you more of a go to someplace fancy for a proper dinner, or would you prefer to host a dinner party?
Oh, I love hosting a dinner party. I don't do it very often, but I like hosting.
And in any specialties of the house? If I'm coming over for the dinner party, what should I be prepared for as your feature dish?
Yeah, I mean, I do like doing a traditional Sunday roast. So nice roast lamb with all the trimmings.
Nice.
That's what I would go for.
That's brilliant. And when you think about talent for a second, personalization or automation?
Oh, I think personalization.
Why?
Enabled by automation. Can I say that?
Absolutely you can.
Yeah, because I think everyone's an individual and you want to be spoken to as an individual and you want to have that experience. I think experience is really driving everything at the moment, and no two people are going to experience something in the same way, so you have to make it personal, or as personal as you can.
That's exactly right. And actually I want to spend a lot of time today talking to you about experience, because I feel like experience is one of those big fuzzy sort of words that in the abstract everybody's in favor of: a good candidate experience, a good recruiting experience, but that can mean very different things in different geographies and in different cultural nuances and at different roles and different levels.
Yeah.
So I'd love to dig into that with you. But before we go too far, let's make sure to just get you properly introduced to the audience for a second. So by title, you are the TA leader at Marsh McLennan for Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
And the UK.
And the UK. Well, yes, sorry, that's a bad Americanism thing that I continue to think of. When I say EMEA, it just includes the UK.
And to be fair, in some companies it does. I guess for us, the UK is so big, it's a region. So that's probably where we have a slight distinction. But yes, no, that's fair enough.
Great. So give me a perspective on your team and where you're focused today, I guess is part one of the question. And part two is also give us a proper introduction to Marsh McLennan.
Yeah, absolutely. So Marsh McLennan, I think most people have heard of it, especially if they work in the industry. So massive global organization, 90,000 plus colleagues across the world. We are really global. And I know that sounds silly, but I've worked for organizations where sort of, they super global, but really have sort of offices in sort of 10 different countries, whereas Marsh McLennan have offices in, a significant number of countries, which from a talent acquisition perspective adds an element of challenge.
Yes.
We are 4 distinct businesses. So we are Marsh, we are Mercer, we are Guy Carpenter, and we are Oliver Wyman. So we operate as 4 distinct businesses, and then we also come together, in the whole as Marsh McLennan.
So in that scenario where you've got 4 distinct businesses, to what role does TA and the people team work across those businesses? Are you both in the business and have a global, approach to it, or how do you balance, trying to think about the business and then think about it, what it means region by region?
Yeah, absolutely. So we support the businesses so I guess the MMC corporate functions will support the businesses with a consistent sort of, approach, but knowing that obviously every business is in a slightly different place and has slightly different challenges and slightly different areas of opportunity that are overlaid not just by the business that they're in or the sector that they're in, but also sometimes as well the geography that they're in. So
give me some context for you and the team. What's your remit?
So we support all the businesses except Oliver Wyman, and we support them. So in the UK, we have UK-focused teams, and then in Europe and EMEA, we look at it more by country by country. So we have teams that maybe where you have one individual who will maybe service all the operating units, whereas in the UK, being a larger region, we'll split out into sort of teams that can focus on a particular business.
Got it. So you have a lot of ground to cover.
Yes.
And a lot of different diversity of role and places in the business. So give me a perspective from your seat and from when you think about Marsh globally, because there's a lot of nuance with that business. The business lines have different requirements. What's the approach that you take in terms of trying to think about talent strategy holistically?
Yeah.
Both as a corporate entity and then trying to figure out how does that fit when you walk across geos or walk across country to country?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's certain things that we know we want to deliver. So we want to have a focus on early careers or internal mobility. We want to deliver a good experience. But we really need to be sort of, listening and engaging to the business to understand what their particular challenge, because Mercer Germany is going to have a completely different challenge versus Mercer in Poland, versus Guy Carpenter in the UK, etc. So it's really trying to understand what is the problem that they're trying to solve for, and how do we take what we're trying to achieve from a people function organization, as well as also meet the business where they're at and solve their problems as well.
And in that scenario, do you have dedicated, do you think about it more as a partner model, that the TA team is a partner to the business heads or the lines and across the countries?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been that way for a while now, but, talent acquisition, I think, in years gone by was maybe seen as a sort of, a transactional sort of, maybe ticket service. And I think that that's sort of, long gone out the window. And it's certainly true as well at Marsh McLennan. We are talent acquisition consultants, and we consult with the business. We understand what their needs are. We go out and proactively identify talent that we feel is going to meet those business needs, and we present that, and we advise the business on sort of, what the challenges are and where we feel that we need to make adjustments in our searches or in our practices to be able to deliver the results that we need.
Well, and that sounds to me to be very much aligned with the brand and the business offering that you have when you think about consultancy and you think about risk and you think about how to help organizations scale. Does it have any particular nuance? Because and maybe the better way to ask the question is, give us a little bit of snapshot of your career journey that brought you to Marsh.
Yes, absolutely. So I started off in talent acquisition by chance, as I think probably a lot of talent acquisition people end up saying. So I started out in working for Hays, so doing a combination of MSP agency, and I worked for a number of different sort of investment banking accounts. I then moved to Bank of America and did sort of a long tenure there in a number of different roles. So I moved more into the operations space as a sort of, I guess, more of a business manager or chief of staff type role, and then sort of became a TA leader, picking up teams along the way, and ended up sort of as the regional talent acquisition leader for EMEA. I then moved to Moody's. And had a number of different roles there, so always changing. So started off looking after EMEA. Then I moved to look after the Americas, but didn't move to America, so I stayed in the UK. And then I took on a global role looking after experienced hires across the board. So anything that wasn't exec search or campus. And then I joined MMC. So just coming up for my 1-year anniversary now.
That's very interesting. A couple things you said I want to pick out a little bit or maybe unpack. The first thing, it sounds like, was at Bank of America, where you had a chief of staff role.
Yeah.
So you were in the business, or chief of staff for recruiting?
For TA, yes. Yeah.
So you got to see a broad operational, a longer view potentially of the business versus just having been, someplace in the recruiting team.
Yeah.
How does that operational experience inform how you think about the requirements to manage the team and facilitate the business?
Yeah, I think it was, I didn't know it at the time, but I think it was a really great move because I think it did give me that sort of view of what are the mechanics and how does it take that it takes to deliver a talent acquisition function to the business, and what are the things that we should be thinking about, because we are a business of our own, and how do we run and deliver that business to make sure that we're meeting our clients' needs. So it was hugely beneficial experience, I think, to my career, and things, there's elements that sort of, I've taken forward and continue to take forward today, just in terms of sort of how we organize ourselves and how we report on ourselves.
That's interesting to me, because I think that's the first time I've heard somebody draw the distinction that you just drew in one of these conversations, where it's we serve the business, but we are a business, which is different from, I think, the perception, and particularly for people who don't live day to day in talent acquisition or talent management broadly, that they somehow think that you're sort of auxiliary to the business, or you're outside the business. So the business does the business thing, and then those TA people do that stuff that helps us find candidates, as opposed to what you're pointing at, which is we are a business, we have constituents that we're held accountable to, and we need to operate as such.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. We need to organize ourselves as a business, operate as a business, look at our results as a business, look at our targets, our objectives as a business, in support of delivering to our clients. But absolutely, I think that's sort of the way we need to think about ourselves.
And do you find that a lot of your peers in TA think the same way?
I think they do. Certainly at Marsh McLennan, they do.
Yes, I think most people aspire to that, or certainly the more senior you get, the more, we all are held accountable to specific metrics and specific things. But thinking about it that holistically, I think, is a real advantage for you. In those kind of roles, or in an organization like yours, where whether you're talking about France or the US or the UK or Poland, et cetera, how much of your time do you have to spend educating the business owners and educating not just your team, but the other people in that supply chain that is talent about what you can and can't do, or what the timing looks like, or how the paperwork needs to go through the system, et cetera, to help? Because one of the things I observe broadly is, particularly from somebody who sits in the business line, not necessarily sits in talent, is there's a lot of assumptions made about how things work, as well as what's required to actually properly interview and provide that experience, that oftentimes there's a disconnect between how somebody in the business line looks at the world versus what good looks like when you think about a TA professional.
Yeah, absolutely. I think communication and engagement is such a critical part of talent acquisition. We do it every day. We know how the process works. We know a background check takes X number of days. We know that's normal. We know there's no concern. Hiring manager who's hiring one time doesn't know that that's normal and doesn't know what good looks like. So it's not a one and done scenario ever. It's a constant communication and education that we deliver. And we deliver that in a myriad of different ways. We can have quarterly sort of, hiring manager training sessions where we talk through it. But I always think that it's always good to sort of, you sit in a room and it all makes sense when they show it to you on the board. But when you have the real learning is when you experience it for yourself.
Right.
And that's where you have to have a really good sort of relationship management and expectation management, communication from your talent acquisition consultant, sort of really sort of help walk them through the process and understand what they can expect, what they can't, and what the timescale's like, and what does good look like. I often say to my team as well, like, no update is an update. Let them know we've not heard anything yet, and that's okay, and that's normal, and these are the next steps that we're taking.
Right.
But if they don't hear anything at all, they'll assume nothing is happening.
Yes.
So that's what we need to make sure that we're sort of, demystifying. So yeah, it's not a one and done. It's a constant engagement and constant communication.
So flip that around for a second. From a candidate's perspective, what does good look like in terms of an experience? And what's the experience you're trying to author for the candidate as she's evaluating, is this the right place for me?
Yeah, I would say it's the same thing in terms of it's a constant communication and expectation management. So just I think people value honesty and understanding where they are in the process. People don't like to not be communicated to. So, people want to have sort of, really clear expectation of what the process is going to be, what they can expect.
Yes.
What the expectation is of them as a candidate, and really sort of, I guess, broker that experience between sort of, the organization and the candidate to make sure that there's a good connection and that we're all sort of wanting to drive in the right direction or the same direction.
So what role does skills and how do you think about evaluation of skills to try to discern and have those conversations to really address a candidate from a personal perspective and say, hey, here's the opportunities, here are paths for you to grow and develop here with our organization?
Yeah, so I guess from an early careers perspective, we have sort of, I guess, probably not a dissimilar sort of approach to a lot of organizations in terms of having a consistent sort of assessment and selection sort of framework where we're really looking to understand sort of, problem solving skills, collaboration skills, communication skills, analytical skills. So it's not necessarily about whether they produce the right answer, but it's a lot about how they get to the right answer, and how they work to sort of, as I said, problem solve, collaborate, analyze, and conclude, and then be able to communicate that effectively back. So I think that's sort of a big sort of area that we focus on.
So how important is grade point in that discussion for you when you're doing evaluations with early careers?
So the business won't necessarily see the CVs. They won't see the grade point. They will, we will do all that screening in advance of that, and we will bring the candidates through to assessment center, and then they will evaluate based on their performance on the day.
And are there situations where, it sounds like there are situations where the team or the hiring manager may never see a CV, may never see a grade point average, which is very much the trend we see going on. What's your perspective on, our CVs going away entirely?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I think for more experienced hires, I think that's going to be hard to sort of, eliminate that because, whilst we hire for potential at all levels, and I think there needs to be a degree of sort of, what are the roles where we can afford a little bit more flexibility and have that more of that retrain sort of approach and that development approach. But I think the reality is that sometimes we do have very technical requirements and very technical needs, and those needs need to be facilitated. I think there's an opportunity definitely at the early careers level. I think the challenge is sort of the process, the operation behind it. How do you take your sort of, your big cohort, and how do you put them through a fair and equitable process without the use of a resume at all? And sort of, that's something that I think a lot of organizations, us including, are working on. How do we level the playing field? How do we make it a fair and equitable process whilst being able to deliver such a huge volume of work in a short period of time? Because actually, pace is something that's really important in early careers as well.
So that's interesting, and I agree with everything you said, and I would argue that you're on the front end of a change that is happening globally, and it gets back to the ideas or some of the capabilities you were talking about in terms of being able to organize a consistent and proper assessment and evaluation process that does move at speed, but where you're looking for communication and problem solving, and are these people going to play nicely with others? Can they deliver? Or, are they going to show up for work and all the other sorts of things, which are much more interesting, I would suspect, than to getting to what you're pointing at in terms of unlocking their potential.
Yeah.
Where can we evaluate what these people might really be capable of, and can we start to orchestrate and put them in the right role that's going to allow them to outperform their initial assignment, which is, opens a lot of doors to go up and to help them build skills and build experiences.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And look, I don't think we've cracked the nut fully, but we're definitely on the journey. And that's again where I go back to insights, sort of, meeting people early in their career, I think is so important, because then you get to, I guess, for want of a better word, evaluate them in more of an informal setting. You've had, they've had an experience with you, they've seen what they enjoy, and then we re-engage them and continue to bring them back in through the process. They join us for an internship, they have a great experience. We get to sort of really see how that individual operates, and then sort of that this is the right place for them and that this is a work that they're going to enjoy doing.
100% agree. And what you're also pointing to is, building a relationship and building a dialogue, right? You want to understand the person and how they operate and how they think and how they can execute. And at the same time, they want to see the same thing from you, right? They want to understand, is this an organization that I can excel in, that, values my work, that can, see what I'm capable of?
Yeah, absolutely. Culture is so important as an organization. Culture is why people stay.
Right.
And that's something that we're really passionate about, delivering, a vibrant and inclusive culture, and a vibrant and inclusive workforce is, that's our responsibility to identify that workforce and to bring them in. And then we want to sort of, develop, engage, retain them. So culture is really important.
So how do you think about culture, and how does the notion of how Marsh McLennan codifies culture and the important parts about culture, how does that come into the talent acquisition process?
So, oh gosh, that's a good question as well. So I guess it's around knowing your business as well as a talent acquisition consultant. So again, it's that brokering sort of, scenario. It's sort of working out sort of, what is the business needs and sort of, what are those, I guess, soft skills or behavioral skills that we're looking to sort of understand, that we're looking to build, that we need within the organization, and how do we ensure that we identify those throughout the recruitment process?
And when you think about soft skills, is there anything that stands out to you?
I think collaboration is sort of, a huge significant point at Marsh McLennan. And I think sort of in most organizations, actually, sort of, we're a team and we get there as a team.
Right.
I think long gone are the days of sort of, I and me. It's around how do we drive results and how do we take collective responsibility for our successes and our opportunities, and sort of, having a team player, I think, is so valuable in any organization, in any role in any organization.
I 100% agree. And I think that's one of the things that gets to that notion of skills that you were pointing at earlier, and part of assessing potential is not just, can you do the job, can you execute on the assignment, but can you activate the people around you to execute?
Yes.
Because there's no version of, particularly in an organization like yours, that aren't too many jobs that are done alone.
No job is done alone. And in much less in recruitment, it's buying in the trust from the hiring manager, understanding their needs, being able to communicate and translate those needs, and being able to sort of facilitate or support sort of the matching process, I guess. So yeah, it's all a partnership, and when they arrive at Marsh McLennan, it's going to be a continued partnership.
And when you are off work, or you're down at the pub after a hard day and a hard week of talent acquisition, and you're talking to your peers in TA or talent or people more broadly, what are the things that you're really scratching your head about? What does the TA team talk about amongst themselves about, here's the next thing we got to get fixed, or why doesn't X or Y work, or here's where we're going next?
Gosh, yeah, the job's never done, is it?
No.
So, and I think sort of there's such a suite of technology and tools available out there. So it's sort of, trying to work out how to make them best work for you, and how to sort of, I think for TA, the expectations of what we deliver are really high. People want a consultative experience. We want to deliver a consultative experience. Our talent acquisition consultants don't want to be transactional. And if you start talking to them about sort of doing sort of, system tasks, they kind of have a bit of an adverse reaction, because they want to be speaking to the business and out there speaking to candidates.
Right.
So how do we take the necessary and critical admin and steps out of the process of the talent acquisition consultant, but also recognizing that they're really critical and that they really need to be done, because we need to be able to have critical metrics that we look at, that we report on, and they're also just very critical parts in the process that we need to make sure from a sort of legal or compliance perspective are taking place. So it's how do we make sure that the machine runs effectively, and that we create space for our consultants to be consulting.
That makes perfect sense to me because I think everybody's frustrated with there's just too much administrivia that goes on with, making the machine work day to day, and back to that CV and some of the other, pieces of the puzzle. But the high ground is how do you find the best candidates and the best potential, and you take your and your team's scarce resources with the people who are most likely to be the match and be the fit for what you need now and what you need going forward.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then how do you facilitate that experience for everybody else who may be brilliant in other places, but just isn't a right fit for the role that you have
Yeah.
or the series of roles that you have?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the constant challenge. And how do we communicate and stay connected to candidates if they're not right now, because we don't have the right role for them, and talent acquisition is about the right time and the right place and the right person in all of those sort of, constraints, sort of, you've got to want to move, you've got to want to change job. This job's got to be the right one for you. You've got to be able to see a roadmap in this job as you move forward. So
Yes.
all of those things have to be right. And if one of those things isn't right, it doesn't mean that we should stop having a conversation with you. It's just that we need to have a different conversation with you at a different point.
Right.
So how do we stay connected? I think that's something else that we just, again, we're on a journey and we're just constantly sort of, thinking about how do we make sure that we're engaging continuously with the talent pool rather than only engaging with them when we want something from them.
How does the organization think about and evaluate, AI, and where are you specifically when you think about AI for hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way that we sort of look at AI is that it's a tool. It's an amazing tool that can afford us sort of a lot of opportunity, and it can change the way that we do things and how we deliver things. But it absolutely can't be sort of used in isolation. So you can't let the AI do the job for you.
Right.
It absolutely needs to be sort of, I guess, managed or curated, checked, etc. And by that sort of that consultant, and have that sort of that intervention, if you like, for want of a better word. But it can afford us a lot of opportunities, and it's everything from sort of help me write a job description, help me make this job description more inclusive, help me sort of make an advert a little bit tailored to sort of an inclusive sort of workforce, or so it's definitely something that can definitely augment and support our roles, I definitely think.
Yeah, and the other reality is it's now pervasive with just in the last year, and I think certainly generative AI has made the entire conversation around AI accelerate. But the thing we consistently see is the notion of AI specific to hiring, where it collides with compliance and what good looks like and what's required on a state or a country level to treat candidates fairly. Oftentimes there's mass confusion internally that people don't understand all AI is not created equally.
Yes, exactly. And this is where it can't make an automatic decision for you.
Right.
It can't be left to sort of, run on its own sort of thing. It's a tool that enables a process, I feel.
Two last questions as we wrap up, back to you as a leader. When you think about your career, give me an example of somebody or an experience that you had that you learned, a lesson or something that you folded into your personal leadership style when you think about what great looks like in talent acquisition, a lesson you learned or something that you take with you that informs how you work and how you lead your team today.
I think being solution orientated, and going to someone with the opportunity and the solution or a number of proposed solutions, I think is something that I learned very early on in my career. I was very, very junior in my career, and I was stuck on a problem, and I was trying to articulate it to my boss, and I sort of went on this very long story about what had happened, and she was like, go away, sit down, think about what it is that you're trying to say, think about what's happened, and think about what you would do to fix it, and then come back. And I was, okay. And I did that, and I sat at my desk and I wrote down, in a sentence, what had happened, why did it happen, what did I think we needed to do next? And I sort of took it back to her and sort of read it, and she said, right, okay, yes, that's fine, go and do that. And I was like, okay. And it was really early on in my career, it was a light bulb moment. It's something that I sort of keep trying to take forward. And the challenges have become a little bit more complicated. They're not quite as easy to write down. It's not necessarily one sentence or a quick fix anymore. But sort of, I guess that sort of framework, sort of, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Mm-hmm. Why are we trying to solve that? And what's our solution, and how do we sort of, approach this together? And I think that's sort of, that has still sort of stuck.
That is a great summary. And I think that's also a good framework that a lot of us can use to sometimes just stop the noise, regardless of whether we're talking about talent acquisition or anything else, just what's going on very succinctly and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
Give me your perspective, what, as a parting shot here, when you've talked a lot about not just experience, how do you enable an experience for candidates, but also honing in on potential and really trying to unlock potential for all the candidates, both for the role they're in now, but how do we grow them, and ideally, how do we keep them and come back? What would be your golden rule, Natasha, when you think about unlocking human potential and what great looks like in recruiting that you'd share?
I think, again, I feel like it's understanding sort of the business and then being able to sort of, never say, it's hard to say never say no to a conversation because there's only so many hours in the day, but really making sure that you're having that rich conversation with the candidate and that you're able to translate that back to the business. It's kind of like getting their trust so that you can say to them, I know that this conversation will be a valuable conversation for you. And I know that there's going to be sort of, opportunity for you to sort of, look at the candidate beyond what's sort of, on the page, and really being able to sort of, understand enough about sort of the candidate and the business needs to be able to sort of, have that connection. But yeah, I think sort of, really listening to the business, understanding them so that you can really effectively identify the talent that's going to make a difference for them.
Yeah, and it's clear to me that just building on that thought, that back to your time in operations, you think about your role and think about your partnership as one of the business operators.
Yes.
And I think that's a mind shift that a lot of people have the opportunity to make.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for your time.
It was a brilliant conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a fantastic conversation with Natasha. It's clear that she's passionate about bringing great experiences to Marsh McLennan, as well as to create great experiences for candidates. Several key takeaways there. Number one, experience is about communication and making sure the candidates always know where they are in the process, that you're able to answer the questions, but maybe more importantly, to tell them not just where we are in this interview process, but how you might be able to grow your career. Number two, the importance of really thinking and evaluating candidates based on their potential. It's not about their CV, and arguably CVs are on their way to being a historic relic. What is more important is making sure that you have a consistent evaluation process to identify potential and help the candidate understand where she might go. And last but not least, Natasha very clearly sees her role as a business operator and needing to perform and drive metrics and results that makes her business accountable and makes her a partner to the rest of the organization. This is more than just the talent team being auxiliary to the business, it's part of the business. And I think that kind of operational success and the operational rigor sets her and team up for success going forward. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and see us again next time on the next episode of Higher Thinking.